Hello guys, today we are back looking at our Scania R730. This build, as you can see, sponsored by our friends in PCBWay. We'll have a little more on them later. But in today's video we are going to try and mount our rear drive motors into the back of this model. So that's 4 of these N20 motors that we're going to try and install in this model. So the first thing we need to do is remove the rear, the little bracket that's holding on the rear axle, because we are going to have to replace this with a frame that can hold our 4 N20 motors. So the plan here, with 4 N20 motors driving the rear wheels and hopefully 2 additional N20 motors on the steering wheels, we're going to have a 6x6 truck here. So with all of them motors, all geared motors by the way, we should have an awful lot of torque. So this should be one of the most powerful trucks that we've built. Should be pretty impressive. Well, the plan is to get an N20 motor in on each axle. So to do that, we're going to have to remove a few pieces here. So this piece of the axle here is going to hit our N20 motor. So you can see that that is the center line of the axle just there, and to get our motor lined up with that, you're probably going to be talking maybe taking 5 to 10 millimeters off this frame rail. We'll try and just take this piece off. It's like a fake differential. If we take that off, and we'll try and save as much of the actual frame rail that's running back here as we can. We're going to 3D print a bracket to hold the 4 motors. We're going to mount it on these 6 screws that we already have here. There's no reason why we can't reuse these parts. So to hold the motors, I have printed these little just brackets that are going to be mounted off the screws on the front and the back here. So you take your 2 N20 motors and we mount them in our 3D printed frame like that. We'll screw them in from the front here. Then once I remove the material from the frame, we'll be able to mount those in here. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to get away without taking too much off this central piece. So for sure this fake differential, and this piece in the middle are going to have to go. So I'll start with that now and I'll check back in with you when I have that done. Okay, so I have made a few changes to the frame of the truck here. We had the drive shaft coming down here, so I got rid of that. And the 2 differentials that were here and here, they are gone. So that's cleared a bit of space for our motors. Then what I decided to try and do, on the 2 posts in the middle, I'm going to have a sort of a hinging pin. So that pin's going to go in the center. Then on each side here, we're going to have one of these with 2 motors, and we're going to try to put some springs on the front and back of each of these to see if we can get some sort of suspension. Worst case scenario, if it's too light or if it's not really working, we'll just tighten the whole thing up. You know, just tighten the screws until this sits flush on the bottom there, and it'll be solid, and that'll be fine. So to get the springs in there, I've had to remove there's kind of supports that were on these kind of posts here. So I've cut them off so that the posts are perfectly round, and now we have a kind of a guide for our springs. The springs will sit down perfectly on those posts. The only problem is that those little rails, or those little supports that were on the posts here, they were determining the height of these mud flaps. So I've had to print these little pieces here that are the right height to keep this mud flap part at the right distance away from the frame, but also the central diameter will let the spring in, so it shouldn't impede our spring from operating on these posts. So I'll just show you down here. So you put that piece on, and then our spring can sit in the center there. So pull this back, So you should be able to see there that the spring has gone the whole way to the chassis rail there, but our little spacer thing isn't stopping it. So when we close it all down, the spacer keeps the mud flap at the right height, but yet our spring can still move in and out. Not that it's going to be moving a huge amount, it is a very small kind of mechanism we're working at. So I have that for each corner there. So I have 4 of those little spacers, we have 4 springs, and hopefully that will allow our piece in the center here to pivot. Now, when I was making this part, I did have a bright idea to put a slot in the center here. Originally it had just been a central pin so that it would just pivot like this. But then I thought maybe it would be useful to have it move slightly up and down. The only problem we might see here is that the 2 parts might move in this axis here, which isn't what we want. But hoping that the pressure from the screw head and the springs, because there's not going to be that much movement in the springs, will keep those parts straight. But the only way we're going to find that out is to actually mount them and try and pull a load with it, and then we'll be able to see what's actually happening when this mechanism is loaded down. Again, if it's not working, we'll just tighten the screws and it'll be solid to it. It'll be fine. If it doesn't work, I'll spin this back to the version I had that was just a pivoting pin, and we'll see how that works. But this is the way we're going to try it first anyway. So the first thing I'm going to do here is mount our motors into each of these. So we have 4 motors and they're held in with M2 bolts. So I'll mount 4 of these first and we'll go from there. Okay, well, I have screwed the motors in place, and now we can see if we try to mount the motors here, the motor itself is actually hitting this part of the mudguard. So we're going to have to snip this off just at this point here. Should be alright, it'll be held between the 2 points either end anyway, so I don't think it'll be that much of an issue. But clearly that's going to completely be in the way if we leave it there. Best thing is just to get it cleanly out of the way and we can move on. Okay, with that piece removed from that mudguard thing there, we can obviously get the frame down as low as we want it. So you can see there, even at its minimum, there's still a little bit of play there, but we could tighten that out of it if we had to. The next thing to do is to try and get our spacers, our springs and our screws installed. On the 4 outside screws I'm using longer ones. This was the original and here is the alternative. The reason for that is it just gives me a little bit more adjustment with the spring. The spring isn't going to be this large, it's probably going to be tensioned down to something like that, so there's not going to be a huge amount of play, because if we leave it up too loose, then the truck's probably going to the drive motors will kind of wobble all over the place, and if we leave it too tight, it's not going to do very much. But we need some little bit of adjustment there to try and keep it tight, but that we might have a little bit of play in the suspension, and hopefully that would help to keep all 4 wheels on the ground when we're trying to pull something heavier. And without a heavy load, I don't think you're going to see much movement in the springs on the rear of this model, because I would imagine it's that light back here that the 4 wheels are just going to kind of bounce over any little rocks or anything, the same as if this was just a solid axle. But maybe when we've a heavy trailer on it, that'll push down enough on the 5th wheel that we might see some sort of movement there. So next thing I'll try and do is just assemble everything else, get the screws in. We have plenty of room that we can solder the wires on here, and then hopefully we'll be able to try put some wheels on and see if we can pull something. Okay, well here's our little assembly mounted. We have our springs in place. The back here was moving up and down, so I added a bolt here just to tighten everything up. To get the heights with the screws, I tightened them in completely. Then I went a turn and a half off on the back and 2 turns off on the front, so that should mean that more weight is on this front wheel, which I think would help it to steer, because to be a little less weight on this. But then when you have a good load on the back, sure, it's going to push the spring down. Catch it on camera, so you can see there's a little bit of movement there. Not much, but we don't really want a huge amount. There's not much in the back. There's a little bit on the front there, so assuming that this works out alright, there's a possibility that this is going to move. With the wheels out there, it's a possibility that this is just going to bow out. So this idea might not work as well as I'm hoping here, but the only way we'll know for sure is to try it out. It might bow out like that, or it's also possible that it's not going to push the springs down at all. There won't be enough weight to push the springs down, because there's no weight in the back of this for a start. All the weight is in the cab. So all we can do is get the wheels on and load it up and see how it goes from there. The next thing I'm going to do is to wire the motors, and I'm going to try and keep it simple by just wiring the 2 motors on the left together and the 2 motors on the right together, and we'll just see how that works. It is possible that the 2 motors will draw different current and that will cause us issues. I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure that's how I wired the motors on the MAN truck though, and it works alright. Or is the MAN truck 2-wheel drive? Not actually sure. I think it is 6x4. It's kind of similar to this. This will be 6x6, but we won't be adding the front ones today. That's going to be pretty complicated, I would imagine. So I'll just get to the wiring of the motors now, and I'll catch up with you after that. Well, as you can see, our motors are running, and each pair is running in the same direction together, so the wiring's working fine. I added these DuPont connectors so we can easily just power that up when we want. The next thing to do is add the wheels. So I 3D printed these wheel rims. It's a dual tire rim, and it's got the D shaft printed into it on this side here. I'm not sure how well these are going to work. The print mightn't have just gone the best. I think they're slightly off center, so you can see them slightly wobbling. Maybe that won't be noticeable when there's a load on the truck, or maybe it'll be going up and down like a lowrider car or something. But the only way to find out is to put it together and just take a look. So these little rims, a simple little groove here just catches the slot in the middle. These tires are just tires I got on AliExpress, I think. I just googled the diameter of the tire and I found these ones, and they seem to work alright. The tires that's on the truck originally are pretty narrow, so these ones are a little bit wider, which is kind of more like what I was looking for. So to get them on, just push them on. So they're a little tight, but not too hard to get on. The next thing to do, we're just going to push these on for now. They're a tight enough fit, so should be alright. You can see the tyre there, the rim kind of gets close to the back of the motor here, so our tyre is actually overhanging slightly. What I might have to do is put a narrower tyre on the inside. Maybe one of the original tyres would do, but for now we'll just let the wheels stick out the side of the mud flaps. Should be fine. Okay, well there's our 4 dual wheels on now, and I'll just show you the little bit of wobble that I was talking about. So you can see there, it's moving in and out, and I think it's a bit worse on this side. You can see the wheels actually hitting the mud flap here. So the tyres are sticking out slightly from the mud flaps, but they're actually not that bad. I don't think I'd be that worried about that if I had the wheels running a little straighter. I think if I improved the support when I'm printing the wheels, I'd probably be able to get that a little bit better. Or maybe I'd have to put a metal insert to try and get the wheel as straight as possible onto the D shaft. Those are all things we can look at in the future. For now, let's just test out our truck. So we can see our suspension is moving slightly, but I would imagine that it is mostly, all that's happening is our flex is out the way. So it looks like we're getting some sort of suspension, but it's not really. If you watch the gap in the center, they're just pivoting out like that. So that's pretty much what we expected, but we can try and get around that with a central pivoting pin and no slot, because at the minute it has that slot. So if we had the central pivoting pin in it, that should help to stop it from moving in this direction. This should be rigid on the central pivot pin then. So with any luck, that would straighten things up, and we'd be able to test out our suspension a little bit better. At the minute it's pretty stiff there. I'd imagine if we loosen it off, it'll be just making this movement worse. We could tighten it up all the way, but I kind of want to see what will happen if we put a load on it. Will it even, it's quite light to make it do this, but will it even do that when we have a load on it? I'm not sure. So we could tighten up the screws on the front here just to take that out of it, but I think we'll try it without it first, just to see how it goes. The tyres are sticking out from the mud flaps here slightly, but I reckon if the same was happening on the front, it wouldn't be too bad. It doesn't actually look that bad really. Well, I don't think it does anyway. I think I'd be happy enough with that. To test the truck now, we're going to use our dual motor driver board. So this is the 2.54mm pin spaced one, and the reason for that is with DuPont connectors we can just easily plug in and out our motors. Your servos come with DuPont connectors generally as standard, so that's going to work pretty perfectly. And at this point we'll just give a big thank you to our sponsor, which is, of course, if you haven't guessed from the cab here, is PCBWay.com. They are sponsoring this build, and they are the company that manufactured these PCBs. So they manufactured and assembled them. So if you are making your own designs for your RC vehicles, or maybe you're into robotics or something else, whatever it is, if you're working on your own PCB designs and you're looking for a cheap way to prototype it, you should head on over to PCBWay's website. They have an easy tool there that'll import your Gerber files, and it'll tell you exactly what it's going to cost, and it's always pretty cheap, usually around about $5 for a small batch of PCBs that you have to solder yourself. And of course they have other services like assembly. Both of these boards were assembled by PCBWay. It's a little bit more expensive, you have to obviously pay for your components individually, and the assembly cost will be a little bit higher, but you'll get great deals on the PCBWay website. So head on over there and check that out. So when it comes to the final design, I'll probably use a smaller control board than this one. But this dual motor driver board with the 2.54mm headers is pretty handy that you can plug in things that quick, and it's kind of ideal for this sort of scenario. I'm going to use the version 4.1 control board on this because I might go to 7.4 volts, and this board has the LM1117 voltage regulator for 3.3 volts. So that can handle it, I think, up to something like 15 volts, but the highest I'm going to go to is probably 7.4 volts, so I'm not too worried. For now though, we're going to stick with the 3.7, and we'll only go to 7.4 if this doesn't work out, if we need more power from the motors really. So I have kind of made a modified version of the TW35 code, because that is a dual rear motor code similar to this, and I'll have that on the next version of the software update. So I think I've saved this as ID 16 on the controller here, so we should have some control. What we do, are the motors running the same direction? Yes, they are. That was an amazing fluke with the wiring. If you had wired the motor wrong, another reason why this is so convenient for testing, if you'd wired the motor backwards, you just flip the plug around, just connect it the other way around. So we have good speed control there. So what we want to do now is head to the diorama, and we'll get a trailer with some load in it, because it's not too surprising that it can drive the truck on its own. We want to see, can it pull a load? So that load was 1.75 kilos, and it was on a road that was made from sandpaper, so about as much grip as you could expect from the trailer, and we were pulling it completely at 90 degrees. So we had to drag those triple axles sideways to get the trailer straightened, and it did it with no problem. In fact, it did it while I'm pretty sure the wheels were rubbing on the mudguards. I'm fairly certain it was pushed down like that, but I suppose that's not too surprising. We do have 4 N20 motors in this truck, so you would expect it to have quite a bit of power with those motors geared down as much as they are. But even though they're geared down quite a bit, with the 3.7 volt battery, I think the speed of the truck was pretty ideal. So we had no issue pulling the load sideways. That's challenging enough, but I wonder, will it pull a similar load up a hill? I don't have the hill built at the minute on the diorama, but I'm working on one, and when I do, we'll definitely be testing it out. Hopefully by then though, we'll have this up to 6x6, so full 6-wheel drive. So I think that was quite successful. Clearly we have to make a few changes to our 3D printed parts here. We should get that working without much problem. We'll just try and strengthen it up, and if we can't get the springs loaded suspension system working, we'll just make a solid rear for the truck and it'll be fine. A big thank you to our sponsors PCBWay. Without their support we probably wouldn't be able to do a build this complex, and if you're looking to get your own designs manufactured, make sure and check out PCBWay. You'll have it hard to beat their prices. I'm sure this is going to turn out to be quite a long video. I'm sure I've been recording for ages, so I think I have enough done for one video. If you're liking the build, don't forget to hit the thumbs up and get subscribed, hit the bell on, all of that stuff. It all helps. And in the next video I think we'll be moving on to the front wheels. So we're going to have a steering mechanism, but it also has to be able to accommodate another pair of N20 motors. So that's going to be another complicated addition to the truck here. If you're wondering what this is, I added just a paper clip around the back here so that we can pull the trailer, because there is no hook on this fifth wheel. So that's going to be another job we'll have to do at some stage. But that's everything for today. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and thanks very much for watching.